Welcome. Again, for those who are joining, we're just sharing in the chat where we're from, what we're hoping to learn today, and how have the recent changes to the food policies impacted you or your community. So far, we've got someone from Southeast Michigan. All right, here we go. Hoping to learn more about changes to food R&D capabilities and resourcing. Got our team member joining from the SAFSA conference. Here we go. And here's a good one. We've got someone that's reports on the undue influence and harmful impacts of big ag and industrial agriculture. All right, thanks you all. Keep adding to the chat and we'll continue to look at that. But again, we're gonna keep everyone on mute, but we encourage you all to keep engaging in the chat throughout the call. And again, thank you for being here today. Let me take a moment and turn my sound off. There we go. All right, for those of you who are new here, Civil Eats is a nonprofit news organization with a mission to broaden and deepen the conversation around the American food system. Since 2009, we have sought to amplify unrepresented voices, hold the powerful accountable, and ultimately to inspire a more equitable, sustainable future. Both through our reporting and through conversations like these with you, Civil Eats brings together diverse viewpoints that are essential to create thoughtful, meaningful change. For the past 5 months, we've been busy at work on our food policy tracker, a new tool to help keep tabs on the federal government. Our goal is to keep a robust record of changes as they happen to the best of our ability, including actions taken by the president, federal agencies, and Congress that directly relate to or have implications for our food system. To date, our team has produced 115 posts. With today's Salon, we're going to get into the juicy behind the scenes details about the food policy tracker and provide ways that you can contribute to its coverage. Also, as a nonprofit news organization, we are proud to be a member of the Institute for Nonprofit News, INN. INN's vision is to build a nonprofit news network that ensures all people in every community have access to trusted news. Today, we'll hear from Paulina Velasco, INN's Collaborations Project Manager. We'll hear from our team, our senior editor, Brian Calvert, who is also an alumni of INN's 2019 Emerging Leaders Council. We'll hear from our senior staff reporter and contributing editor, Lisa Held, and also our Operations Director, Matt Wheeland, as they all discuss the food policy tracker. You can learn more about everyone on our Eventbrite page. But now let me introduce our moderator, Paulina Velasco. Paulina is INN's Collaborations Project Manager, but she also has some experience in the food systems. She shared with us that she has worked picking grapes in the wine harvest in New Zealand for about a month and has also milked cows at a dairy farm. And when she lived in France, her roommate was a winemaker, and Paulina shoveled fermented grapes in the wine cellars and prune vines in his vineyard. So it is my pleasure to turn it over to Paulina for our conversation today.
Thank you so much, Kalisha. I know it's such a cliche that I was in France and I met a winemaker, but it's true. And those are all very privileged examples of being able to pop into the food systems world. But it's very enlightening to have those experiences. I'm really happy to be here. I'm a really big fan of the food policy tracker at Civil Eats. I know all of us are, and that's why we're here. So I'm really excited to myself get to learn how it came about behind the scenes and talk to Lisa, Matt, and Brian about it for a little bit. I think you can feel free to put questions and stuff in the chat and we'll get to a Q&A section afterward. But to get us started, I wanted to ask about the origin story. So Matt and Lisa, if you want to tell us why you decided to launch the food policy tracker in January specifically, and how did you prepare for it? Maybe Matt can get us started.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Paulina. I will say that I can't believe it's only been 5 months that we've been publishing this. Like every day feels like a week, if not longer. So Lisa and I started thinking about this at the end of last year when we were doing sort of our regular check-in about Lisa's been doing these investigative series for the last few years. And last year she spent a bunch of time working on the pesticide industry. The chemical capture series turned out really well. So when we were touching base about what she might want to look at for this year, it was after the election. And I think, I don't know, Lisa, you probably remember more than I do, like the sense of what was coming in terms of the speed and intensity of news and changes being proposed. Um, we decided maybe it needed a little bit of a different approach than like a long investigative series. I don't know, Lisa, what else would you add to that?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Trump was kind of promising to come in and move really quickly and make sort of sweeping changes to everything, including all the agencies and systems that impact the food system that we cover. And so we were thinking, well, how would we even plan an investigative series, an in-depth long-term series when it sounds like things are going to be changing so quickly? And so we were thinking like, what would serve readers the best? What will be needed if that's how things are moving? And so we thought, well, we want to keep a record. Like if things are moving quickly, it's going to be hard to keep track. And I'll add that there has been in the last few years kind of fewer and fewer reporters focusing specifically on food policy coming out of DC. And so we were kind of seeing that as well. Like there isn't anybody just covering the changes to food and agriculture there are great reporters at Politico. There's some other great people doing incredible work. A lot of it is behind expensive paywalls, and we had taken our paywall down. So we're like, we can reach a broader audience. So yeah, I think it was the combination of those two things, wanting to keep track, keep a record, and seeing that like it didn't seem like anybody else was really doing it.
Right, right. Because the what's so fascinating about the tracker is that you guys are following every little step of the way of the decisions being made in DC. And so I think part of what we want to try to do today is understand how you follow these stories, like from when they begin as like a policy proposal in a committee, like through all the different steps to kind of their impact on the ground, and also how readers can contribute, right? How you can source stories from the people using the tracker. So can you explain, Lisa, how you decide the most important story of the day? And I was hoping we could talk about this week's story on Monday for a couple of reasons, because it's kind of complicated. I mean,
They all
like, right. And I was reading really carefully. It's like, it's this move to effectively kill some rules that came in the last administration. It happened, the timing is interesting to me, and I want to know how you make these decisions as a team. Because it happened, the proposal was happened last week, but then it's being discussed this week by an appropriations committee. So yeah, how do you decide when to put that out and when you have enough information maybe to put a story out?
Yeah, I think that story is a really good example because it speaks to the fact that even though we just launched the food policy tracker in January, we were not starting from scratch. So our team has been covering food policy for years. I've been doing this for more than a decade. Matt has been doing this work longer than me. And everyone on our team has been, I mean, Brian came from incredible publications before he joined us. Naomi's been doing this work forever. And so we had this base and to be honest, we were already like paying attention to all of this, and I already had this like world of sources and people coming to me, and we just before we just weren't telling people kind of the play by play. We were gathering all of that and waiting longer and then like doing these big pieces. And so the transition was more about like,
Mm.
now we're going to be like telling you all this stuff we're taking in real time. And that story that you mentioned, the Monday tracker post, was on the Packers and Stockyards rules. So that's a great example because we've been covering the Packers and Stockyards Act for years, and I don't even know how many stories I've done on on those rules at this point. The law has been in place for over 100 years, and it has never had enforceable rules on the books that would actually allow farmers to kind of access the protections it's supposed to provide. So the Biden administration had managed to get this set of rules, these 3 rules finalized, which was a really big deal. And we were kind of, I was waiting to see like what's going to happen. Like, I was looking and waiting, like, are they going to change this when the new administration comes in? And that I had no idea they would do it in this way. Like, so then it's like, well, this appropriations bill, which nobody's really paying much attention to because the One Big Beautiful Bill Act is taking up all of the energy in Washington. So you have to be kind of like looking in these different places, not just focusing on that one big thing. So then it's like, okay, they put out the text of this appropriations bill. And even then, I don't think when I first saw that came out, I even saw it because it's 140 pages and it's tucked like in the end. So there's all these cuts to funding that's sort of what people see first, and that's what you're focused on. And then I think the way that I saw it was that the National Farmers Union said to me, like, came and said, this is they actually tucked this rider into this that basically says they won't be able to, they'll take away USDA's ability to enforce these rules. So then it's kind of like, basically then we can just quickly put up the post, and I already have all this context from before about what this means and why it matters. And we're able to kind of provide that news with the context. That's a really long answer, but
To understand what it means. Yeah, no, that's why the tracker is so good. It's like I know that I'm getting the latest, but also that you are explaining to me what it means. And we're gonna circle back to this idea of like, especially with your and Brian's work on like deregulation, where like there's a lot happening where like the teeth are taken out of being able to enforce rules. I also really like what you said, Lisa, because it points at what you've been saying is like the deep sources you have already. So you have this source among farmers that are like, hey, this thing happened, and like that's why you're well poised to report on it. One more like kind of general question about the tracker and your work before we get into some more juicy topics. Lisa or Brian or Matt, we know one of the goals of, and you mentioned, Lisa, like things are being, and this is probably true of every administration, things are being written, in between the lines in these long documents. But also you alluded to the pace at which a lot of changes are happening. And we know that one of the goals of this administration is to sow confusion and chaos. And you guys are like, we're going to still pay attention to this. How important is that speed aspect, the daily or nearly daily part of the tracker, to achieving the goals that Civil Leads set out to achieve?
I can try to answer.
Why don't you take a first stab,
I
Lisa? I
didn't
have
want
thoughts too,
to.
but go ahead.
I don't want to dominate the conversation. I mean, I think we're trying to move as quickly as possible, and we are moving very quickly. Especially, we're a very small team. This is it, right? And like, and our
Right.
editors, Margot and Naomi, who also help out. And but yeah, this is it. It's small, so we are moving very quickly. But we're not. I think actually at the beginning we were moving even faster. We were trying to just like be like, as soon as something happened, publish it. And we kind of found that it's better to just like I definitely found take a beat, figure out like, okay, is this important? How, like, because there's so much that we can't capture it all. So sometimes if you move too quickly on like one thing, then you miss this thing over there. So it's sort of like a lot of triage. This is coming from over here, this is coming from over here, and then moving as quickly as possible and making sure it's timely, but not I would say like we're not trying always to be like the first on everything, or we're just trying to like keep up with the news. Does that make sense to you guys?
Yeah, I was gonna say earlier too, like thinking about what our initial vision for the post in the tracker would look like was very short, was like a
Yeah.
few sentences. Like we would really just be on it. We would publish as soon as it happens. And we realized pretty quickly both that there's still way too much news to cover it that way. And more importantly, that I think the benefit that we bring to this work is that we have the context and we can connect the dots that nobody else is connecting. So now we're being more thoughtful. We're trying to help people understand both what's happening, but also how we got here, what this means, and what comes next when, when we can predict that.
Yeah. And I think what I really appreciate about the way that it was set up, where Matt and Lisa really focused on policy actions that are sort of driving a lot of things downstream. But when you have a small nonprofit news organization, you do have to do a lot of triage and resource management, especially time and attention. And so you don't want to build an accidental news operation inside of your organization, which sometimes it's close to doing that. But by focusing on actions that are being taken, then that allows for quick decision making. And then really the triage is about, okay, sort of how important is this to our readers? And how important is this to having some downstream ripple effects that we may want to cover later? And I think that's another way that readers can get involved is by sort of looking at if you're following the tracker, you can kind of see policy changes as they're happening. You know what's happening because they're actions. We're reporting on actions that are being taken. And then, then I think that helps people just kind of understand what they're seeing in their own lives, neighborhoods, or policy areas, just to say like, oh, okay, now this is going to have X, Y, and Z implications, and now I want to keep an eye on that. And so I really appreciate that sort of laser focus. Otherwise, it would become a very difficult operation to manage.
Definitely. And Brian, can I actually follow up with you? Because I wanted to ask you, and I know all of you cover all the topics, but I wanted to ask you about covering immigration and how it relates to food policy. Obviously, it's also like very front of mind for all of us this week is the ICE raids.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you specifically about what you just mentioned. It's your coverage of immigration actions is a good example of that focus and that angle on the policy part. And so how do you think about focusing on the policy part, the government action part of immigration actions and enforcement, and how it's connected to food systems?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of tricky because that very quickly sort of leaves the realm of food policy tracker. The policy is clear. It's a crackdown dragnet sweep policy. And so once you sort of report that or lay that out, now it's sort of like, okay, how is it being implemented? And what we're seeing now are increased sweeps in farm country, including Central Valley. And also one of the things that I'm sort of keeping an eye on is how does it impact the people who are doing urban agricultural food work, dealing with urban agricultural growers or markets, farmers markets or for sale markets. Just kind of watching how those things impact people who live in urban areas, not just farm workers. And another, I think, sort of important aspect of the food policy tracker is that even though you're talking about policy, you're really talking about people. And what we've been having a lot of conversations around this week are that how do we make sure that we are not just talking about people who are being rounded up and the implication is who's going to grow our food, right? It's sort of like who is this impacting, and how can we sort of understand that as these policies do or don't change. And so I think that's a good example of how we have to sort of like really think about how a policy might have an impact downstream.
Yeah. I have so many questions about every single one of these topics, but let me move to another one since we have so much to cover. And that's really good food for thought. Brian, thank you. Um, Lisa, can we talk about USDA funding cuts and freezes and staffing? There's obviously a ton to write about, and there's like, my impression is there's ongoing constant changes, that it's across all these different offices I never knew existed, like, and initiatives, right? Like, it's like never just like the department, it's like a very specific part of it. Like this week, you all reported about like lawmakers arguing about how the USDA is going to disperse disaster aid funds. And so I was like, I don't think I even knew that the USDA was in charge of disaster funds because it's for farmers and ranchers. So how do you keep, and you could also bring in other examples, but like one question I have is how do you keep track of everything that's you've reported on as it's moving through all these parts and what the next update should be?
Yeah, I don't know how to really answer the question of how I keep track. I just like move really fast and have lots of
Many
lists.
tabs.
Yeah, many tabs, lots of notes and recordings, and I think, but yeah, this topic it really rose to the top of our coverage pretty quickly, because it happened so quickly that the USDA essentially froze all already contracted grant funding, which like I think it's important to note that, anytime a new administration comes in, they have different priorities. They're going to make big changes to the way things work. That's normal, but they don't usually stop paying on contracts that have already been signed and are already in the works. And it also came at this time, the Biden administration, they were big on spending. They were investing in, especially in farms and a lot of food processing around the country. So they pushed out a lot of money. They had a lot of farmers and food processing and nonprofits working with farmers that had gotten funding. And so it was like this moment where all these people were already working on these projects and it just stopped. And so keeping track of that it's still difficult. Most of the funding has been unfrozen, but there were also lots of contracts that were canceled because they were deemed diversity, equity, inclusion. There were big programs that were canceled or changed, like the Climate Smart Commodities, which is $3.1 billion program. So you can imagine how many farms were involved in that. The local food program for schools and food banks also, like, it's a ton of money. Food banks lost tractor trailers worth of food that they were expecting. So there's just so much happening, and the hardest part of keeping track is like there hasn't been clear information coming out of the administration about like what was happening. So I would like to say this because all these people on this salon can help with this going forward. I have relied a lot on people within farmer organizations, farmers, all these people coming in because I would say, oh, the USDA says actually that this one program is not frozen, and then a farmer that I've known forever would text and say, I have that grant and I haven't been paid and I'm not being paid, and so it's like a lot of kind of trying to figure out how to verify and what was happening. There was never just like a list that came out where they were like, these are the programs that are, they didn't make it easy. And it's still, there's a lot to kind of sort through. But I also just want to say one thing to add on what Brian said about like how the tracker is so focused on like government actions, and that's the way we narrowed it. But then all of that reporting is feeding our other reporting on our main site, like all the feature stories. Like Brian's written, he wrote this great story about immigration protests, and then I have written stories about, like, for instance, the farmers that lost the funding in the Climate Smart Commodities program. And so as we're doing all this, we're only writing about the government actions in the tracker. Then we're using all that reporting to tell the stories of like what's happening on the ground in our feature coverage, if that makes sense.
Totally. And that actually answered my follow-up question for you, which was like, let's keep giving readers and the people listening to the salon ideas for how to contribute. That's part of what I've really enjoyed the last few months in my job at INN, I get to read a lot of the coverage from the Rural News Network and all over the country. And there's just like that on the ground perspective of how things are playing out. Shout out to someone attending Jefferson County Beacon in Washington State, for example. It was one of the first outlets where I saw like reporting on the ramifications of these decisions on like the food pantries, like you were discussing, the food bank system. And it's like it's so varied too, right? Like small farms in Vermont, like generational ranchers in Texas, and like it's interesting to see and it's cool to hear that matters to you guys, or that you receive those tips too. Um, One thing that stood out to me about this coverage is even as grants disappear and then come back, there's all this loss of trust. Like, I find that really fascinating. And I feel like we're kind of tiptoeing also around this question of like, we're asking bigger questions about like what we want our government to do for us and what kind of society we want to live in. And like you were saying, Brian, like, it's not just like, oh no, I won't have strawberries. It's like, who do I want to be a part of my community, you know?
Yeah.
What does it mean to be American? All these great questions. But to the point about trust and like farmers, for example, losing trust in the government that you know government agents built over a long time. Can we talk a little bit before we get to questions? We'll get to questions in about 2 minutes. And Matt, maybe this can go to you about the trust question between Civil Eats and its audience. How do you see the tracker playing a role in building the trust we have in Civil Eats expertise? Or yeah, I mean, and in building that relationship.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was thinking about it earlier, just in the way that we bring that context and analysis to even the short reporting, that we've been doing that all along. For 16 years, we've been doing this in-depth reporting on the food system and connecting dots that other places will not connect. And it doesn't always make for easy reading because the answer is always like, well, it's complicated, but I think it's really helpful to acknowledge that nothing is as simple as it may seem on the surface. And I think that the readers who know us and who were here when we launched the tracker knew what to expect. And I think we've met that mark easily. But what I think is most exciting to me is to see the way that we can use this kind of reporting to reach new people and help them get just a little sense of like, yes, you're seeing this story in the news. Here's what it means. Here's a little more detail. Here's how we got here. All the things that Lisa and Brian were talking about how this feeds into this is how we already do our reporting, but now you're sort of getting a peek earlier in the process, and we're sharing this with readers at an earlier stage than when we're doing a much bigger story.
Are we ready for some
Yeah.
questions?
Yeah, I was going to jump in and say for the guests on the call, we're going to leave the mute on, but feel free to pop your questions into the chat feature, and Paulina will get to those, but they'll continue the conversation also.
Perfect. Yes, please put your questions in the chat. Okay, so then we're back to talking about the report. I have, let's see, do we want to talk about a topic? No, we'll talk about the reporting still. I guess, Matt, do you foresee any particular challenge coming up? Looking forward. And I'm thinking particularly of the amount of misinformation coming out. Right before our call, I was joking with you all that I can't pronounce MAHA. I keep getting tripped up when I pronounce Make America Healthy Again. And what I was trying to do I was like looking through videos on YouTube to see if someone pronounced it so I could copy them and practice before we joined the call. And I heard about how the directives themselves, the MAHA directive, the paper that came out was full of inaccuracies, and that the Department of Health and Human Services doesn't want to publish in scientific papers anymore. And so we're just having we've always had misinformation in our information ecosystem, but we're having inaccuracies coming from the top. How does Civil Eats think about that issue and prepare and bolster the reporting to combat? the misinformation?
It's a really, I'm not sure I know how to answer that question
Can you
because
please solve all our problems?
okay, here, give me a minute. Yeah, we don't know what's coming. I mean, I remember early on the first month or so of this administration when everything was very, very frantic. Lisa and I had a conversation about it's gonna slow down soon. Like they've done all this stuff. There's no way they can keep this pace up. And lo and behold, that hasn't been true.
You jinxed it.
Yeah, well, it's all our fault. So I think where we are now is we're going to start seeing even more impacts, and we're going to start seeing these proposals either get pushed back and changed, like we're talking about even just with today's post about the proposed snap cuts in the budget, or we're going to see them start to be implemented and we'll be able to see the real world effects. And I think that's where we are ready to jump in and keep an eye on all these things and share the most important stuff with the readers. But yeah, Brian, Lisa, I'd love to hear what you guys think about that.
Yeah, I'd love to add something on the misinformation and particularly related to Maha, because I've really I think about this all the time, constantly. It is really hard to cover Secretary Kennedy and the Maha movement because it's a lot of really basic kind of positive messaging around like, of course, it's a good idea for us to have more fresh, healthy food and to focus more on disease prevention, for instance, versus treatment. And then it's all mixed in with a lot of misinformation and bad science. And there's a lot of parsing of like which is which. And it's tough. It's really tough. And like our coverage of that report, for instance, is a really good example because we did a really short tracker post right when the Maha Commission report came out, just saying this came out. These are the big takeaways off the top. And I actually had a conversation with Matt in Slack where I said, we're getting this out. We're just telling people it's out. I didn't look at all the references for this post. And we were like, yeah, well, we can't. If we're just telling the news that it's out, we don't have, there's no way. And I said, I was like, I'm sure it looks like, there's probably issues with some of them. And then, we published just that it had come out. Here's the takeaways. And then lo and behold, like the amazing other publication went through all the references and found made up scientific citations. And so then we updated our post to say, this other publication went through and so there's this constant like making sure we then update and provide that information and the tension between like moving quickly and sharing news when it's fresh, but then also having to go back and say like, okay, now what do we need to dig more into to make sure that we're providing the science and the information that is factually accurate.
Well, so we actually got a question from the audience. Because things are moving so fast, do you have a correction policy? Or a way to say this changed, or we read it again, or how do you deal with that?
Yeah,
For
exactly
example,
what Lisa just spelled out. Like we are always watching the news and what's coming out. And when something changes and it is materially impacts what we have reported or adds to something we've already published, we absolutely go in and we'll add a note to the top of the post. We'll share it on social media so that our readers who follow us there get a sense that this story is still evolving. So yeah, I don't know what else you would add to that, Lisa. Have there been other notable changes that we have reflected in the tracker since we published?
I mean, we even update when it's not necessarily like a correction, but just like something has moved and it doesn't feel like enough to do another story. So we'll add an update. If we got something wrong, we'll definitely if we got something wrong, we'll publish a correction. But yeah, I think that update process is generally how we've dealt with new information coming out that really like Matt said, materially kind of affects that post. We'll just add an update right at the top, directing people to like the source and make sure we share that out.
Something that I maybe people would understand but may not fully realize is that professional journalists live with this constant little pinprick on the back of their neck that they messed something up or got something wrong, which is something that robots don't do and authoritarians don't do. So the idea that like if we get something wrong, it's going to get corrected goes back to this trust issue. And especially when you're dealing with an administration that doesn't just parse or obfuscate, but like just says the wrong thing or lies. And you have to actually handle that in the copy itself. And so we've had conversations around like, okay, well, the Secretary of Agriculture is literally saying this, but we're seeing this. And you have to handle that in language. So
Yeah.
I'm a big proponent of the phrase "in fact," comma, right?
Oh, nice.
In fact, this is what's happening. And so I think, yeah, just sort of we do have a policy. We are able to do it. And I think that's another thing that's great about the tracker is that it can just constantly update and it can feed back into itself so that one story might get updated and come back to the top, and then it gets updated again. And if we need to, a correction would do the same thing. I think it is a testament to Lisa's professionalism that we really don't do that very often because we don't have to, because it's so tight and the reporting is so good.
I agree. There was something I read in a recent post. You guys wrote, after initially granting an interview request to civil elites, the USDA's press office rescinded the offer and was unable to send emailed answers to the questions by press time, which I love this because it's so clear. It tells me so many things. It's like not only that you reached out and didn't hear back, which has happened to me before. And like you said, Brian, there's that little voice in my head being like, oh no, should I have waited? You know? But in fact that you were granted an interview and then it didn't happen. And so like, I guess, and I wanted to link this to a question we got from the chat. Is it difficult to get sources to go on the record right now? And how does that affect your work?
Extremely difficult. Yeah, it's gotten a lot harder and harder. Yeah, that example is a good one where, I mean, the interview was scheduled. It was on my calendar. I was waiting for a call, and then I got a email or communication from the USDA spokesperson who was essentially said, "Oh, I was told that I never should have set this up." And we actually we're not really granting interviews at all. And which had been my experience to date, like to that point. And I was so excited that I was going to actually get to talk to someone that's taken away from me. But yeah, it's been, I mean, to get information from the agencies right now, they send a lot of canned responses, which is always true to an extent with every administration. You know, they rarely provide a lot of information, but there's definitely a marked change, even from the first Trump administration and then Biden to this one. It's more closed off in my experience, hard to get answers. And because there have been a lot of threats to employees, I mean, there have been actual, on the record sort of like the employees have been told, if you talk to the press, you're gonna be out of here. I have a lot of sources within agencies, but they won't be named generally. And
Or
then
talk to you on background and stuff like that.
yeah, background, there's so many conversations that I have that, our readers will never see because I have to understand what's going on and people will explain it to me, but they don't want to be named. And even then farmers and people because for a while, especially with the USDA stuff, people didn't want to talk about the fact that their grant was frozen or that it was canceled because they were hoping that it would get fixed, and that they thought that if they spoke out that the agency might then penalize them for that. So there's a lot of fear.
Yeah, I was going to say that exactly. This is new territory for us as a newsroom in that the sources that we're talking to, when they're willing to go on the record, which in the past has never been an issue before. I don't remember us. I mean, aside from a few really sensitive investigative stories where we gave anonymity to a source, we've never asked anybody to or been asked by a source to be anonymized. We've offered that to some sources because they have important news about how these policy changes are affecting their farm or their community, and they don't want to tell us on the record because then they're on the radar. And so some of these organizations have multiple grants from the USDA or grants from USDA and EPA. And if they speak up about their canceled USDA grant, well, then they may lose that EPA grant too. So it's such a treacherous situation we're navigating about trying to get these stories out without putting people at risk unnecessarily or at all, but really, especially when they may not even have thought about the possible implications of that.
That's really fascinating. I hadn't even expected you guys to talk about that, about finding reticence even among people affected. That really puts this onto a kind of a different perspective. Thank you all so much for sharing. I could talk to you forever. Everyone, please also go read Brian's coverage of the EPA deregulation, which we didn't get to talk about. And I'm learning so much, not only about food systems from Civil Eats, but just about how the government works. And yeah, and it's a joy to read, and you guys work so hard. Thank you so much for sharing this behind the scenes look at your work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We truly appreciate you, Paulina, for guiding this engaging discussion with Brian, Lisa, and Matt. So thank you all. The time went by really quickly, but thank you all for sharing your time with us today. Your insightful questions, comments, and expertise were essential to shaping this discussion. If you want to keep the discussion alive and going, if you're a member, please join us in our Slack community. And as we wrap up, we'd love to hear one nugget from you about what you took away from this conversation today. I'll put that in the chat. And then also, while you're doing that, sorry, give me I'm multitasking here. But after you do that, sign up for our weekly digest and breaking news from the Food Policy Tracker. I'll put that in the chat as well. Also, if you'd like to share updates with our team, you can email us at tracker@civileats.com. We also have a more secure communication email, which is civileats@protonmail.com. And then also Lisa is on Signal, and she's opened up if you all want to just reach out to her directly. And again, I'll put all of this information in the chat so you can follow up accordingly if there's any information that you'd love to share with our team. And then finally, the work of our food policy tracker is made possible with the incredible support of our passionate members and donors and funders. Thank you for believing in the power of independent journalism. If you're not yet part of our membership community, now is the perfect time to join. This salon, the Slack community, and are just a few of the benefits that we have to connect you all with each other and with our team as a community. But if membership isn't for you, a donation of any size helps keep our reporting free and accessible to everyone. However you choose to support us, we'd love your support, and we welcome you. So I'm dropping those links in the chat. And last, this concludes our salon, but we do look forward to continuing the conversation with you. We hope to see you at a future salon or engage with us in any other way. But this time it's been great with you all. And we thank you again, Paulina, thank you. Thank you to our team for this great conversation. And we hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.